Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today I'm on with RJ and Mel and Tony Reed, and also myself.
Hello.
And we're going. Uh-oh, I hear echo from somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not me. I have on my headphones.
Well, here's what I'll do. I'll turn my see if mine might be me. I doubt it, but it could
I don't
be.
have a live feed on for a feedback, so that's
Hello. Oh,
Give me a
it's gone
second.
now. It's
Oh,
gone.
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I ran into a creationist today while coming out of biolab. So out of the real science and then into this. I got this. How God reveals himself through science. Chemical evolution cannot create life by this guy named Tim Stout, who is from the I've looked this up like 3 times in the past 5 minutes. The Rock Baptist Church, Greenville, Texas. I will be emailing him probably after this so I can get an interview with him, which should be interesting, I think. Because he knows a lot of the common creationist tropes. And he also told me, fun fact, that whatever he gets wrong, he will change it if I can convince him that he's wrong. So should be fun.
That's the key. Convincing.
So you the guy that you bumped into is actually the Stout guy that wrote this himself?
Yes, he wrote it himself. He says, or at least if I remember correctly, he told me he wrote it all himself. It's just his name on this. No
He
one
copied
else's
all the
name.
stuff fair and square.
Yeah, I guess he did. Got all the stuff down.
How is it organized? Is it all just origins or life stuff, or is there any material on human evolution and or various subtopics?
Kind of. It's mostly abiogenesis, that origins are bust. He starts out with the situation, chapter 1, where he talks about people are just, people just don't listen to God. They're just, doing their own human thing. The proof of God is everywhere, whatever. Then chapter 2 is, let me go back to it, is why natural processes cannot create a living cell, which sounds very objective. Chapter 3 is middle stage problems. Chapter 4 is information, God's signature written in a cell.
There he may be riffing off of Steve Meyer, because that's Signature in a Cell is his book, so he may be troping some intelligent design stuff, which means he'd be a smorgasborder, because he'd be drawing off of young Earth creationist material and then lumping in, here is the android, Peter.
There he is.
Hey.
How you doing, Peter?
Hi, everyone.
See, that's what I suspect he does. I think he's just kind of ripping off people in general. It's not really, I mean, he calls himself a younger creationist, but he's also taking arguments from intelligent designers and things like that.
It's easy for them to do that because intelligent design never steps on the toes of creationism. So it's fairly easy to do that if they don't look close.
Right. Let's see. And then chapter 5 is entropy and abiogenetic disconnects. That's one of his favorite phrases, abiogenetic disconnects.
Okay.
Evolution after chemical evolution, chapter 6. Chapter 7 is miscellaneous issues. Chapter 8.
What does he regard as a miscellaneous issue?
Had I gotten to that part yet? I don't remember. Let me take a look. Oh no, that was the part. That was what I was just. We were just talking about where he fires a whole bunch of arguments off. Just and
does it have an index, by the way?
An index?
No. You're like expecting far too much out of a pamphlet.
He has a bibliography.
Yeah. That's actually extremely useful. The bibliography is probably his most useful area, because if you want to track down any inconsistencies in the way he references sources can act as clues to where he might have got his stuff from, and those pesky ellipses.
Ergo cogita is correct. Yes, miscellaneous issues is just a Gish Gallop, and we'll
Oh, can you put a link up to the live chat?
Oh,
Here, I've got one right here. I can put it in the side.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I love to peek on that way. Also, the more eyes that we have on that way Jackson doesn't have to necessarily keep eyeballing that all the time.
Yeah,
I know exactly how troublesome that can be.
if only all these people weren't watching us.
Yes,
Chapter 8 is What is Science, which is a whopping 3 pages. Something tells me he's going to skip
probably
philosophy of science in
observational
there.
versus.
What is science in 3 pages or less? It's like a stream of tweets, is it?
Exactly. It's like
So
all those, important issues regarding philosophy of science and things like that. Nah, we're going to skip
None
those.
of that's important. You
No.
okay, since he's got a bibliography, presumably alphabetical, I'll ask, does he got any Dwayne Gish in there?
I hadn't checked, but I will see.
Yeah, anybody puts a bibliography up, that's like, okay, so he's not dealing with that. Anything from Steve Meyer?
Well, what was interesting is he didn't have anything from Hovind either, which I thought was interesting. Meyer,
that's not surprising.
No Meyer.
Yeah, okay, that's kind of interesting. Yeah,
he's more of a he's got some Bergman in here, James Tour. He cites himself a few times.
Ooh,
which is a big no-no in science. You can't cite your own work.
He cites Todd Wood, so he's an interesting one.
Yeah, he's operating in the official creationism of Answers in Genesis and ICR. So he's not dabbling with the Wackaloon thing. So you can easily do that without ever bumping into Karl Baugh and Paluxy tracks. If he's talking about origins of life, he can steer a fairly narrow little track.
Well, he does jump into some evolution later. Let's see. Oh, chapter 9 is God and Humanism. Chapter 10 and 11 are irrelevant. It's just jerking off for Jesus. But
please tell that. I'm pretty certain.
Is that the title of the chapter?
You wish.
Be fun if it was. Wouldn't it?
No, it's who is the creator.
He
and
was revealing
the creator.
himself. The title is about revealing God. So
that is
God
true.
Reveals himself. That's kind of illegal in several states.
Very true. Very true.
God exposed himself in the sanctuary.
Oh gosh, that reminds me of the Dream Team, that film. If you've not seen the Dream Team, you have got to watch that film.
I don't think so.
Michael Keaton?
No, I haven't.
The Michael Keaton movie?
Yes, Michael Keaton and the guy that was in
Christopher
Everybody
Lloyd.
Loves Raymond. Christopher Lloyd and the guy who played Frankenstein in Young
Peter
Frankenstein.
Boyle.
Peter Boyle plays a guy. Okay, this is completely unrelated, but it reminds me of this. Peter Boyle plays a guy that thinks he's Jesus. And in order for him to be Jesus, he has to get naked. He's just naked all the time. So he goes to a church and he's just like, yes. And it's like this very spirited type of thing. And then he just starts, he's just like, woo. And then he just strips down naked in the middle of the church. Gosh, it's a brilliant film. You have to watch The Dream Team.
I will consider it. Sounds very interesting.
It's actually a pretty funny movie.
Okay. Huh.
I will hold back the water, Tony. Don't be afraid.
So how many pages does our guy's bibliography run?
Well, it's front, or I guess it's one full page front and back, and then half of a page.
Oh my, 2.5 pages of references in his bibliography. Wow, I am positively overwhelmed.
That's for 73 pages.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
I mean, that
includes for that
the,
short of a little pamphlet.
Well, that also includes the jerking off for Jesus chapter, or chapters.
Well, the what? The what? I'm sorry, did I not get a joke, or did he really?
No, it's just 2 chapters where he just reads the Bible, basically telling us that there is a creator. We're gonna have to stand judgment. God created the world, blah blah blah, all that stuff. Nothing fun there. Just, I mean, there's nothing really to object to. So
his brain is using the same method in that chapter as he was elsewhere. He's repeating secondary tropes that he doesn't fact check. and the Bible is just a very long secondary source that doesn't have many pictures.
Maybe not in yours, but I got the Lego Bible.
Oh, oh! I strongly recommend everybody get Crumb's Genesis, the illustrated Genesis. That thing is an absolute hoot. Oh, it's hilarious.
The Lego Bible isn't bad either, though.
There we go.
Have you seen the Lego Bible, James?
No, I haven't.
That's awesome. That guy needs to get a medal. It's awesome.
True, very true.
He created the Old Testament in Lego.
I kind of want to see that because I went to
it'd be fun
Bible
to see the Tower of Babel. It's fun to see burning shrubbery and the parting of the Red Sea. That could be all quite impressive in Legos.
I was quite a good Christian. I went to a state in Bible quizzing, so I would be probably kind of interested. I wonder if they'll start doing Bible quizzing with Legos. That might be a good draw for the kids. Please construct.
Then we want to have the Lego Mahabharata and
the Quran
and the Popol Vuh and all these other ones. Everybody gets to have equal time. You can have the little sets that they can buy, and kids can have religious wars with their little Legos.
You jest, but when I grew up, I have to say something. When I was a kid, I grew up in such a strong fundamentalist home that my dad would only let us play with Jesus toys on Sunday. And so he bought us Jesus action figures. I had a Jesus action figure and a Mary action figure where she was pregnant and then not. And then I also had a David and Goliath action figure. I also had animated videos. Now here is the loophole. Here is the loophole that my dad had because he really, really loved sci-fi. He said we could watch Star Wars if we pretended that the Force was the Holy Spirit and Darth Vader was like the devil and Luke was like Jesus.
Darth Vader did nothing wrong.
So I grew up in a very strong fundamentalist house, so I'm fully aware of Jesus toys. That is the thing that exists. Carry on.
I put a link in the side chat for the Lego Bible. I don't know, Jackson, if you can give me a wrench, I can put it in the side chat.
Oh yeah, of course.
I just checked it out. I was very shocked. I thought you guys were kidding. I'm looking at this really exists. Wow, that's brilliant. It may be the best Bible ever.
Just as the culture where people were illiterate would be building cathedrals with essentially pretty stained glass cartoons to show everybody what the theology was. In the modern technology where everybody has their Lego sets, of course they would do a Lego.
Tony, we would never joke about something like this.
Well, let me ask you, with those Bible action figures, were there any like ships or maybe a donkey that Jesus could ride?
I think all of them are in there. I think
the places.
I don't know if they're the play sets, but the guy did create them. So if he could, I'm pretty sure everyone else could.
Oh, I was referring to Mel's action figures.
Yeah.
Did they have vehicles they could ride or anything like that? Maybe a cross they could put them on?
They didn't have anything like that. I think my dad probably didn't see the need of having actual, kung fu grip with the hammers and the nails. We didn't really have that. But we did have videos, animated videos that we bought. They were kind of like time travelers that went back in the past and got to see everything, expand. And of course, Moses was white, as was Jesus. Everybody was white.
Were they Mormon toys?
They were not. I will have to find. Oh God. And they were really high end VHS tapes because they were in the clamshell. You know what I mean? With the little heart. They were like super deluxe videos. I'll have to see if I have to remember the title. This is going to take me some searching, but if you watch it, it's fantastic. You can go back in time and watch like animated Moses and all of the plagues And then they talk about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. That's one of the 7 wonders of the world. And that's probably the most educational aspect of it. And then you learn about one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was interesting being me as a kid.
That would be amazing. Did they do any advertising? I could just imagine the Jericho action playset. Yeah, that would be freaking awesome.
I imagine they were. They would have had these for the aim for the kid market, along with assorted books that would be edifying, because you want to get the minds young. You don't want them going off on their own and reading, Finkelstein or somebody on the Bible before they have a chance to encounter.
I can imagine going seeing the advertisement. New John the Baptist action figure with removable head.
Yeah, and then you have to have the Salome character in that, all that. And,
Tony, you could do like commercial voices, I think.
Thank you.
Like I love your voice in Paul's videos. Like welcome to Lactopologia.
Well, yeah.
Hey, do the audio book for Slam Dunk, Tony.
Okay. I was actually for that show. I was actually trying to impersonate the guys that were actually doing the announcing in the Science of Genesis. So I was doing my best to sound just like him.
Portentous.
It sounds silly.
Gravitas.
No, it does not sound silly. It sounds great.
Okay.
I mean, the How Creationism Taught Me Real Science videos have always had that gravitas in them, I think.
That's sort of evolved over time because I never have the same voice in every episode. I don't know what I'm doing. I barely know what I'm doing.
It's okay. That goes. I think that goes for all of us. I hear echo again.
Echo.
Let me turn my mic off. Tell me if you still hear.
Hello. Nope. Okay. I think you can turn it back on, Tony.
I guess it's me.
Maybe is it? Maybe it is. Huh. I don't know. Such is life on the open road. Hello, Cliff Jumper.
Hello there. How are you doing?
Just fine. How are you?
Not too bad. It's finally gotten slightly warm here.
It's never not warm where I am, even in the winter.
I live in Manchester and it rains 54% of the time. So,
man,
I think this is it. I think it's called The Greatest Adventure: Stories from the Bible. I think that's what that's called. Let me see if I can Google that. Okay. I may have found the videos.
I pulled on my bibliography. I do have a Timothy R. Stout in my bibliography. I got 3 sources from him. The Testimony of the Origin of DNA from 2012. That was Creation Science.
Guys,
Creation
it's
Research
on
Society.
Amazon, and it was generated by Hanna-Barbera.
Yes. RJ, wait, RJ, what did you say the name of that article was?
The Testimony of the Origin of DNA. That's from Creation Research Society. And then he's got the Testimony of Soap Scum, also from the Creation Research Society. And then the Fallacy of God of the Gaps. All 3 of these are from the Creation Matters thing.
No,
they're all available online.
He doesn't cite any of those. He cites himself as how evolutionists misunderstand entropy, because yes, he does argue for the second law of thermodynamics in his book.
That would be fully, yeah.
That was a fun part to read because I thought, oh no, I know what he's going for.
If you can do a PDF scan of that someday and fire it off to me, I would be delighted to have that.
Heck, I could probably send it to you after our interview.
Okay. Yeah.
The testimony.
And thank you for the book.
Anytime. He also wrote The Testimony of Potential Effects of Sediments on Abiogenesis and a Statistical Analysis of Enzyme Sequence Probabilities. Because he gets really fancy. Most of this is extremely layperson, but he gets very sciencey. Is it in the middle section, whatever it's called? The middle stage problems. Yeah, he starts actually talking about some kind of technical things. Well, part of it though is he just goes over this couldn't happen randomly because that would take billions and billions of years. You know.
Yes, indeed.
You know,
The old-
there's
what?
a thing that makes me chuckle when it comes to the creationists and abiogenesis, because they believe in abiogenesis and they will refuse to accept this, because abiogenesis is life from lifelessness. The only difference is mechanism. In their viewpoint, it's God went and suddenly there was life.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I've got more questions for your bibliography.
Okay.
Okay, under the A's, does he have anything from Anastasi, Carol, and John Sutherland, 2007? Two-step potentially prebiotic synthesis of a
Let me look at
D-cytidine.
Sutherland.
Yeah, so the Anastasi.
Oh, that's very weird. I know he cited Sutherland in there a few times, but it's not under the
Well,
S's.
I've got the call up here for the various Sutherland articles that I have. So I was going to curious. So apparently no Anastasi. Next
No.
one down the line would be Bowler from
Is what?
2013. BOWLER, prebiotically plausible. Okay, no
No.
Bowler. Then the next one would be Choudhary, CHOUDHARY, 2010.
That's
Okay, bingo, bingo. Then we got Lilly, David Lilly and Sutherland, LILLEY, 2011, Chemical Origins of Life.
No.
So he manages to avoid, let's see, farther down, L.
There's a Kavanaugh reference down
PATEL.
here. There's a little Kavanaugh reference.
Well, yeah, if he's got wood, he might as well have Kavanaugh. So
Yeah.
it looks like that he's not bumping into what. Oh, by the way, what's the publication date of the pamphlet?
The publication date, 2017.
Ooh, so he's managed to avoid all of the relevant technical literature by Sutherland in his survey.
I mean,
the
he
field.
avoids.
Okay,
There are a few
top of his
spots.
authority quote.
Do what?
Yeah,
What'd you say?
it'd be interesting. Then keep us posted as you plow through the thing, because the specific works that he cites of anything Sutherland has done is where he would be intersecting the actual technical literature. The same thing for Sostak and a lot of the other researchers in the field. So
He mentioned
to find out
Sostak.
whether he's relying on dated material or, which is just as likely, that he isn't reading any of the original research himself. He's just gleaning what other people have told him about it. It's fun to measure. Is he a primary source fact claimant, or is he just entirely a secondary source addict?
Oh no, I'm sure he's a secondary source addict, especially by the way he argues, where none of his arguments are new. Like I'm not reading through this and seeing any arguments that are just making me stop and go, "Wow, never thought of that before." It is all.
Yeah, it's the usual.
He has a Deemer and Sostak book titled "The Origins of Life" from 2012. He talks a bit about Deemer in here. He spends like a few pages, or like 2 pages or something like that, talking about him. But okay, well, I guess we'll start at the beginning.
The spelling on that of the Deemer name, D-E-A-H. Yeah.
Deamer. It's like Dreamer, but without
the
R.
M-E-R. There we go. Yeah. I've got quite a lot of David Deemer, although not that book, because of course I usually can't afford to get books.
Yeah, books, they get expensive.
Textbooks too. Am I right, Jackson?
Hey, I use slug books.
I collect textbooks for fun, but I get like outdated.
You sound like Kent Hovind. I collect textbooks.
Well, from a scholarly approach, they're very useful to have older books.
I read mine, and I have degrees to back up the ones I bought.
What, are you saying Kent Hovind doesn't have a real degree? What are you
Possibly. What do I know? I don't know anything at all. I'm just here. I'm like the Ringo of the group. I'm so glad you guys just invite me still.
You know, he actually, in his discussion with Aaron, he actually read out of one of his textbooks, and it didn't say what he said it would say. It was almost sad if it wasn't so hilarious.
It was an inconceivable moment.
My favorite bit of the Kent Hovind paper is the first line where it says, "Hello, my name is Kent Hovind."
Yes, he starts off as
the first thing you put in a paper, of course.
Yes, your name. You say, "Hello, we are the researchers Zostack et al., and we're telling you today about our paper."
Well, you have to remember his audience. He's not writing for upper-level creationists. They don't pay the slightest attention to him. He's considered a doofus by people at the Answers in Genesis level. They've criticized him a lot as being incompetent. So he's aiming his stuff at his followers who often don't read or and certainly never fact-check him.
Yeah.
And Jackson, I have to interject here because Kent Hovind does have several legitimate degrees. Sad part is all of them are in his body temperature. So.
Boom,
Rim shot.
Oh my
that
goodness.
was painful, Peter. That was painful.
Is this thing on?
Well,
Yes.
I talked to him, so.
Why
I
did
would
you
know.
do that?
He's the reason I'm here.
He's
If
not
it
the
was-
reason. Is he your dad?
No, he's the reason I'm on Twitter and I'm on YouTube.
Why?
I gotta say
Combat
the same
Hogan.
thing. I gotta say the same thing. That's the reason why I'm on YouTube now, is because I watched a number of his videos and went through them. And I just decided to do the research on it, and in the end, I went, this could be an entire series in and of itself of debunking.
They're almost teaching me real science. Wait a minute, that sounds like a good thing.
My tip project in part was inspired by Hovind because when I decided I thought I could do a work that would be fresh, it was because I was seeing stuff about Philip Johnson nobody had noted, and I had Richard Milton, the creationist, semi-creationist, and Kent Hovind, who back in the 1990s was not nearly as widely known as he is now. So yeah, I'm in the biz I'm in part because I'm going, what? When you see a Kent Hovind speech.
I mean, I didn't start YouTube because of Kent Hovind specifically, but I did start because of a creationist. So I guess we all have creationists to thank for. Well, maybe not Mel.
me.
But,
I started because 1 in 4 Americans think the sun revolves around the earth. So that's
pretty
I'm
intense.
like, I looked at the National Science Foundation study. So after I quit teaching, because I was pursuing my second graduate degree, I was like, I feel like, I need to contribute again. So that's why I did the whole YouTube channel thing and Periscope. It started as Periscope and then it branched into YouTube. I've been on Periscope longer than I've been on YouTube. So it just kind of spilled over to that, and then, technology, and I figured out some things, and I'm still learning stuff. So that's cool. But it's just, 1 in 4 Americans think the sun revolves around the earth. And I'm like, yes, I can't cope with that.
And Tom Willis, who wrote the Kansas Educational Standards in 1999 for intelligent design, also thinks the earth revolving around the sun is not a settled science issue.
well,
It has effect on real stuff.
Oh no, yeah, the group that comes here to yell at the students from Mississippi, they're geocentrists.
Yeah.
I did not know
small
that.
coterie of geocentrists, and what's his name, Elmendorf, who was the guy that got the equal time creationism legislation off the field in the 1980s. He's a geocentrist. So the geocentrics have an impact, scary, in a way that, say, flat earthers don't.
Well, I mean, heck, Jason Lyle's own what is it, his little anisotropy idea, it implies geocentrism from what I understand.
Well, and Kent Hovind, my favorite part is when he figured out in one of his videos, he was announcing where he felt that God's throne was in the center of the universe, which wasn't exactly where the earth is, but he's kind of close to that.
That's pretty
He's
funny.
all powerful, he's all seeing, he's all knowing, but he needs to sit down every once in a while, I guess.
Don't we all?
Yeah. Well,
He had to rest.
also really threatened by mud brick pyramids. That just scares the shit out of him.
Or iron chariots. I mean, to his credit, he sneezed out the entire universe in one day, but spent the 5 other days on the earth alone. So,
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be cool to find out that his throne is a rocking chair?
There we go. Yeah. Well, I've always been fascinated by that giant gold-plated Trumpian cube that the 100,000 elect are supposed to be living in Revelation.
Oh well, I do. Also, I realize we're half an hour into this, and we haven't actually
How
talked
time
about the
flies
book.
when we're talking stupid.
It's okay.
Gosh, I don't know. I always kind of thought,
I
you know, it'd
enjoyed
be
it.
kind of cool if God was more like General Zod from like the Richard Donner films and Superman. Kneel
my.
before Zod, because you know I might think that would be a little
He
bit
has
cool.
that aspect in the Old Testament. He's more of a pussycat in the New Testament, where he becomes this kind of distant, sweet cakes father who just loves you and all of that. But in the Old Testament, he was jealous and petulant. He didn't seem to
Yeah.
notice stuff until somebody comes in and tells him about the mud brick pyramids, and he goes, wait, go down and check that out. What, don't you know?
Well, you know, then maybe somebody introduced a type of kryptonite to him that makes him pretty easygoing, and that's why he's not so new, you know, Zod. And
Yeah,
he's
God discovered weed in the Essene period,
Yeah.
and that settled him out quite a lot.
It is a distinct
Ironically,
possibility.
I actually play the voice of God for Prophet of Zod.
Kinda cool.
Oh, by the way, since
Wow.
you bring up
Illuminati.
Zod in Superman, the Richard Donner did a director's cut version of it, which was the version he wanted to do as opposed to the one that was released. And
The
so he
second
put back
film,
in the
right? We're talking the second film.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's fun to watch because it would have gone a different, more serious direction than the way it was done in the second film, and it's kind of fun to watch that one.
I need
Plus, you got to
see
see
that.
all the cut footage of Marlon Brando that they didn't put in because they didn't want to pay him for it.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah. I
well,
like the first one a bit. It's kind of cool.
the booklet.
Yeah, back to the book.
on topic. I'm sorry, Jackson.
No, it's
I just
okay.
randomly like jump in with
All these things
randomness.
that we are discussing are very interesting. You know, Zod, God, Tony as
rhymes.
God, for
You know,
Zod.
in English, we could make a haiku or a
I think-
poem about God and Zod.
I mean, I think that's
And
what
maybe
people are
they're
going to take away
friends.
from this discussion.
If
That
God
Tony
and
is-
Zod were friends, what would they do?
In a way, that's what happened with a lot of the Old Testament. Is you had a hometown, a hometown God, Yahweh, who was not necessarily the only God, but he was the hometown God made good. And over time, it got modified. So older deities were submerged into archangels, and then you had some of them turning into kind of demon spirits. And so they act as the little detritus of previous cultures that get folded in. And then the trauma of going through the Babylonian captivity created the big G only God approach. And that put a different element on the flood story and the creation myths. And then eventually, after it had a little more centuries to settle, somebody actually wrote the shit down. And that's the version that we end up with as the Old Testament.
The Phantom Zone is hell.
What are we talking about?
So Zod is the devil.
Oh my gosh.
You know,
Sorry, go ahead.
What? Go ahead, Cliff.
I have a fun argument for basically, if you read the Bible as it's written, now it only really works if people take it as a literal story, as this literally happened. Okay, so the Bible literalists, they, you know, it's an argument against them mainly. So if you read the Bible as it is, God is a trickster God, or he's not omniscient. Sorry. Okay, so if we go through the list of where is it? I got it written down, so it's easy to get. Give me a couple of seconds. There it is. Okay, so go through the list. Why put the tree of knowledge in the garden in the first place? Why create fruit that must not be eaten? Why create and allow the serpent in the garden? Why allow the serpent to speak, which is a strange thing for an animal to be able to do? Then if sin didn't exist before the fall, Adam and Eve couldn't possibly know the difference between right and wrong. You can't sin if it doesn't exist yet.
Okay, so I have an answer to that. I do have an answer to that, having been a person that was brought up in a fundamentalist type of world. The answer that they would give you is that God generated those particular things to kind of boost that type of knowledge in individuals to where you would actively choose to pick God and not the bad things. The bad things have punishments, yes, That's meant to kind of steer you back towards God's light. But God wants you to have this knowledge of everything, but to actively choose God and not sinning and this living this type of moral life. Because you could do these bad things because you know about them now, but there's a power there. There's a power that you have to where you could actually, well, I could go and do all these horrible things, and I know they exist because of the tree of knowledge that happened. So, but I'm actively choosing to follow God and follow this particular teachings that he has. So that makes God appreciate that a bit more, because he gave me this knowledge and I'm giving over to him that thank you, and thank you for giving me this knowledge, and I'm going to continue to choose you. So that puts you in God's favor.
But that's the problem, though, because the free will thing makes it even worse. Because before God said, "Let there be light," he already knew the choice that they would make before he created the garden and the fruit and the serpent and, all these elements, and gave them the free will to choose. He already knew the choice they would make before they did it, and then punished them for doing it. And then much later, he has to die for the sins of humanity, for the rules he set in motion, in order to forgive himself for the thing that he set in motion in the first place. I mean, it is bonkers. The only other conclusion is that he's not omniscient, at which point he starts to, you start to unravel another element of, what God is supposedly like.
He's not all knowing either, because he didn't realize that if you put two people in a garden, don't tell them the difference between right and wrong, and then tell them don't eat from that tree.
Well, see, no, that's not true, because any Christian will tell you he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what would happen with Christ. He knew that would happen. He put it all into place, because people actively picking God and continuously picking God shows their devotion to him, and that pleases God.
Okay, but if that's the fact, isn't that setting up people for original sin on purpose?
He created sin. He allowed it. He knew it would happen, and he set it all in motion so that it would happen.
Yes,
you gotta have sin, otherwise the redemption of Jesus doesn't make any sense. So it's this colossal Lego set of plugins that you have to end up with this messy package. The fun part is, from a scriptwriter's point of view, there's nobody that can take this story and film it straight, because it's just never going to work dramatically. So they got to knock off pieces to make it work effectively. That's been true of the Ten Commandments and all the other storylines where they make it. They can never film the story straight.
And because
the thing, sorry, go ahead, Jackson.
I was going to say, and because of sin, atheists came into the world, and that's why this booklet was written, which is was the main topic. I'm
sorry.
Yes, keep us on the straight and narrow there.
I am not good as a moderator. This should be known by now. I fail.
You need to be more assertive, Jackson.
When have I been assertive, RJ?
Yeah, you need to get a dosage of RJ assertiveness and mouth offishness, and so once you have that, you're settled.
I just get my sonic screwdriver out and I zap people and tell them, "Are you fixed yet?" So that's just what I do.
Wait, why are we here?
Would you like a jelly, baby?
Are you fixed yet? No. Let me try harder.
RJ, I think you might find the... Oh, okay, so to preface, the first chapter of the book is called The Situation Today, which basically just says, which is basically his introduction. But one of the really interesting things he does in it is he talks about information, like genetic information, which creationists never define, but he gives a reason for not defining it. Which is intriguing. He says that is because information is an abstract entity. If this definition, or he says the Google search engine defines abstract as existing in thought or as an idea, but not having a physical or concrete existence. If this definition applies to the genetic information controlling the activity of a living cell, then it points directly to that cell as having been designed by an intelligent being. Information is strange. It is an abstract entity, not a physical entity. It has no mass nor energy.
Ooh.
Thought is not the same as
so if I could,
oh my God. And the Google search engine says.
Well, he defined
an
abstract.
undefinable property proves that the definable thing is by God. And this is typical of that origins or bust sentiment, where they want to go back to the origin of air quotes information, air quotes the first cell, air quotes the first replicator. Whereas Darwin and company and virtually all modern scientists start with what we have. And you can see natural mutation, natural mutation, natural mutation, natural mutation back millions of years, tens of millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. You can see nothing but the natural processes. Where is this designer stuff coming in? Is any of us design?
For him, it's... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mel.
Oh, no, I'm just saying, I just can't get over that he thinks information is some kind of abstract thought. Information is an umbrella term for a lot of different things. It can be thought, but thought isn't in itself information. It's just not. Data is information. Evidence is information. Books are information. Now, it's just... But you have stuff that's tangible that you can hold. I mean, you measure stuff. I mean, oh.
Well, yeah, I think it's very funny because creationists are always saying, at least in my experience, that DNA contains information. And then when you challenge them to tell you where exactly the information is, they fall flat. Often because they don't know anything about genetics.
The problem is, I mean, I don't know.
Dembski is the pure definition of this because he's written book after book after book and is now functionally retired. He's off on writing religion stuff now. And he has never once tried to apply his concepts to actual genetic information. And we're getting feedback.
Yeah, I can hear it.
I wonder if it's coming through your headphones, Jackson. And then it's just so close to your microphone.
It's coming through my... Well, I'm just using a headset, so I don't know.
How sensitive is your mic?
If he has his main speakers off, it shouldn't be a problem.
Well, sometimes I do find that there are certain headphones where the mic is so close to the headset that it can actually pick up what you hear.
If we're getting feedback,
you can all turn it off.
Row your boat. It'll be really fun.
I know this might sound like a simplistic, thing to consider here, but you have actually turned off the speakers, right?
It's not Jackson.
I turned off my speakers just now.
Jackson muted himself, and the echo was still here.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, it's not me.
Yeah, my speakers are off.
It keeps like coming in and out. I don't know. Yeah,
it's demons.
Okay, so going back to this weird perspective of information and how he can use Google and that's not real. So I don't quite get that. So Google search says, and I'm like, that's a thing that you typed in. That's real. That's in the world. And you're saying that's abstract. Abstract is looking at some kind of piece of modern art and trying to decipher it. That's different. That's abstract. You can see lots of different things in a particular piece of artwork. That's abstract. It is not something that's tangible. Abstract is something that you cannot measure, and it's highly individual to each person. Information is information. It's sometimes it's wrong, it's blatantly wrong. But it's still, it's words, it's books, it's measurements, it's all kinds of different, it's an umbrella term for a lot of different things.
Right.
Yeah, the main thing with genetic information is that it's a replicating system. So that no matter what you define your supposed original information to be, eventually it's mutated and it's doing new stuff, but it did it by natural means, not because of any intentional reflection on the information, in air quotes, that it is occurring much later on. And if they don't apply it to a specific case, it's just boilerplate. So Jackson can let us know whether or not our author ever actually tries to illustrate his claims about information with actual genetic examples.
Oh no, RJ, you're no.
Silly talk.
You are far beyond this. It's like I was saying. I mean, he has very few sources, but he makes a crap load of claims, and he cites, like, I highlighted the sentence, which is on the next page. He just says, ultimately, it appears the entire first cell capable of independent survival needed to have had a single-step first appearance. He provides no evidence for this whatsoever. Nothing.
Well, of course not. He's
He
not
just-
required to.
Yeah, he just basically he brings up the concept of information, sort of, but then says that it doesn't really have any meaning. Then he makes an analogy about Paul Revere. Then he just talks about how code is neat, and then finishes with an assertion that, cells can't evolve. There you go.
Yeah, and basically what all of that will boil around is a Luca, which is the last universal common ancestor, and scientists naturally trying to figure out what that progenitor organism must have had in terms of how many genes, what kind of replication systems, is long before homeobox genes, and so forth and so on. It's still a very complex system. The question is, what happened before that? I don't know anybody in the origin of life field who argues that Luca is the structure of the first living system, or
Right.
that the first living system is that similar to what we see probably hundreds of millions of years earlier than any potential Luca. We know, as I covered in the stuff I'd done on origin issues before, there's all sorts of little puzzling clues that are lurking around in the genome, particularly involve how RNA is used independently of DNA, and the fact that the ribosome that actually plugs the proteins together, or amino acids together to make proteins, that its core is an RNA ribozyme, not a protein itself. So you've got hints at a pre-Luca system that you can't find immediate analogs to except as little blips here and there. And so they're trying to retro-engineer something that happened 4 billion years ago. Tain't easy.
Right. Yeah. And go ahead.
There's an amusing thing that I've noticed with creationists, and I'm not a science person. I'm really not. I'm quite ignorant. But even I'm smart enough to realize that when people say that, DNA is a code, we are describing a way to assign an idea of what how something's made up. So, for example, the 4 chemicals, ACT, what's the other one?
GCAT, GCAT.
And uracil, when we talk about the RNA, and that's the fun part. Why is it U instead of T in RNA? We don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, but all I'm trying to say is that we effectively just label these things in order to make sense of what we can see in the real world. We have effectively created the code to describe a list of chemicals in which order they're in.
Right.
That's it.
You haven't met Nephilim Free yet.
Oh, that's right.
And you don't want
And
to.
you don't want to, because he'll show you an animated video. So the keyword being animated, of the workings of a cell, and then pointing out that some of the parts of the cell are shaped like humans. And God did this on purpose.
Well,
Okay.
I
actually know. I know somebody who has a doctorate in
Tony's face. Oh my god.
Well, what I'm saying is, I know somebody who has a doctorate in chemistry who is a creationist to a degree, but she accepts evolution and things like that. When we were and I went to undergrad with her, and she saw tRNA, and she said, "See, Jesus is everywhere. tRNA is in the shape of a cross." And I was like, "Really? Okay."
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
I've
tRNA.
heard that one, but Nephilim Free is better, because he'll explain that there are
Better in one way.
Oh yeah, he says
That's a relative term, isn't it?
DNA has like punctuation in it. It says like words and punctuation, and he goes on this whole tangent, and it's like, What? Can you actually point to any of it?
In many ways, they think like occultists. If you look at how occultists would ram astrology into tarot cards and do all of that, they're using the same kind of conceptual frames.
No, they don't think.
That's the biggest problem. But nevertheless, if you're looking in the sense of how they assemble arguments.
If you're looking at basically a cartoon and then telling other people, see, now you can see how God made it. No, you can't. It's a cartoon.
You know, you have to. You have to keep in mind these people do mental backflips to try to choose their, to try to get their point across. And why do they do that? Is because their belief systems are so important to them. It's part of who they are, and it's how they identify themselves. So when you're sitting there arguing with a person like this, that's why I don't do that so often. I have a completely different way of going about things with that, because you're not. My goal isn't to try to rip them apart. My goal is I just want to make sure you understand what words mean. But the thing is afterwards, you have to have a bit of some kind of care for an individual when you're telling them everything that they've ever believed is entirely wrong, or they've been told lies their entire life, or that's not actually what science is. There's no care put into place for them to have to cope with that. They're still humans, They're still human beings. And so my tactics, the way I handle stuff like that is far different. But, that's me, having been so heavy in a fundamentalist type of world and later a scientist. I know what that transition's like, and it can be painful. So
I know something about Nephilim 3 that a lot of people don't realize. And that is that one of my friends spoke to him off air. He may have been drunk, may not, I don't know. But after talking to them, he confessed that it basically came down to, he realized that if Genesis wasn't literal, then Jesus died for nothing, and that he needed to protect that.
Yeah, basically the same thing Todd Wood says in his blog when he talks about the evolution.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe he died for nothing.
And even the older of creationists or intelligent designers, or for that matter, theistic evolutionists, there's always some little nugget of reality, in air quotes, that must be true in order to connect all the daisy chain. They've got to have the locomotive out to the caboose, and how long that train is and how many cars it has will vary from one apologist to another. So some are not having any problem. The Jim Sano guy, the Roman Catholic that we encounter, who's not opposed to evolution per se, he's a conservative Roman Catholic, and he's perfectly fine metaphorizing the Old Testament at a drop of a hat. He has a different measuring stick than the kind of Kent Hovind types that if they let the tiniest little chink of error creep into the Bible, the whole thing falls apart for them. So you have a spectrum of credulity going on in the mindset, but there's always some little nugget that they got to draw the line on and they can't get rid of.
Well, nothing's like that on pretty much everything else in the Bible. That can be, analogous to all sorts of things. But just Genesis has to be literal. That's it.
Well, I find
somebody has to.
Sorry,
somebody's got to tell Nephilim. No problem. Somebody's got to tell Nephilim 3 that Jesus didn't die for nothing. He died for 30 pieces of silver.
Well, the way that I see it,
he died for a weekend.
Especially one of some of, and I say this not as a dig at heavily fundamentalist Christians, but some of the worst people I've known have been churchgoers. And so for me, Jesus died for nothing if there are people that don't actually follow his teachings. And so I find a lot of individuals cherry pick and forget a lot of what Jesus actually stood for, because Jesus's teachings actually are really, really awesome. Like no bankers in church. He was anti-establishment. He was angry. Jesus was awesome. He was flipping tables in churches. Like, why are these people in here? This is not what this is for. He was very against like organized religion, and he was like all about helping the sick and the poor and clothing people. He hung out with like the dregs of society. It's like they're people too. And then we have like current society just decides they're not going to listen to that part. So in my personal perspective, Jesus did die for nothing if people don't actually follow his teachings.
Well, you're sort of right and not quite right on the flipping over tables thing. What happened
I want like angry Jesus. Angry Jesus.
Oh, yeah,
is
sure. I mean, he was angry. What's happened with that was that effectively you got people that were capitalizing.
I know. I went to I went to state Bible quizzing as Matthew.
Oh, right.
Alex. I completely understand. It was just I was dramatizing situation just for sheer enjoyment and entertainment. But there you go.
On the other side of things, on the science side.
Let's get the science on that.
I did want to mention one other thing about Neville.
Oh, go ahead, Cliff.
I had I think it was about 2.5 hour conversation where he agreed with pretty much every single thing that I said, including something he disagreed with me until I explained it to him, at which point, yes, he agreed with me. And we didn't talk about evolution at all. We talked about aeroplanes.
So he's not anti-aerodynamics. That's reassuring.
When he gets onto a certain subject, you talk to him about photography or airplanes, because I know airplanes. We had a great conversation. It's only on some situations, on this subject that he just gets incredibly embedded. And I've used an analogy about the protectionism that many creationists and religious people go through, and it's the idea of you lead them up a trail. And it's like, hang on, I don't like where this trail is leading. I now need to start carving through the jungle with a machete in order to get on the trail that I want to be the case, rather than want the way it seems to be going.
Yeah, you can find some often young people who have learned apologetics kind of as a rote set of cards to work off of. And if you bump into their argument and short circuit their thing, they can't just improvise. They're not good at that. So they have to go back to the first card and try to get back onto the little paper trail again.
Yeah.
So Jackson, science. You were going to mention science.
Also science. No, I think that is very interesting. Did not know that. Chapter 2. Chapter Twop. So the second chapter, he's talking about why natural processes cannot create a living cell. And he starts off the chapter with a terrible analogy. He says, I like to eat brownies. Hello, my name is Kent Hovind. No. So he says, I like to eat brownies. And so he's like, there's a way to make edible brownies. But if you put cement in your brownies, they will not be edible brownies.
Has he never heard of rock cakes?
Well, he basically uses this analogy and says this refutes abiogenesis.
Well, I refute that analogy because they would still be edible. They wouldn't be nutritious. But
unless you like cement. In which case you may be happy. Ironically, that's eerily close to my analogy about Bible apologetics. The idea that you had a cake recipe, if you thought of the Bible as a cake recipe, and that instead of there being flour, they put in cement. The conservative says, yes, this is God's recipe. It tastes terrible, but that's not our job. We're supposed to eat this stuff. Whereas the liberal says, well, they didn't really understand cake chemistry back in the ancient times. The important lesson is God wants us to have cake. And that was the spectrum between liberal and conservative apologetics. So it's ironic that he should try to hit on that analogy and try to use it about biogenesis.
Yeah, it is pretty funny. I mean, I think the worst part is he says the brownie analogy refutes the claim that life will form somewhere.
No, it doesn't.
Naturally. And no, it's like That's not in any way how that works. Also,
yeah, go ahead. Well, I was just wondering that they're be intriguing as issues as you read through the book, whether or not he discusses the kind of the core problems, the issues involved with the biogenesis, which is metabolism versus replication. And so the scientists have moved on to say that it's more likely that metabolism had to develop before replication. Otherwise, the first replicator would just eat itself out of house and home. So that is giving a guidance. Then you've got lipid cell membranes, and there's a whole bunch of other side issues to that. And it'd be intriguing if you can tell us to what extent our creationist pays attention to those rather fundamental issues.
Hello, Jade.
Oh, hi, Jade, the cat.
Hello.
Hello,
Yes,
turkey cat.
Yeah, I've got the Punisher cat there for the time being.
That was
Punisher.
I've not seen the Punisher.
It is fantastic.
I've heard he loses an inhuman amount of blood.
He's
that's what I've heard.
Yes,
to survive.
Yes,
I mean, I want
a cat. You know, a cat has think of a cat.
They have
with
9 lives.
Punisher. No, not just 9 lives. 9 Punisher type lives.
Oh man, that's pretty intense.
That's like almost immortal, right?
basically. So we're talking about a little booklet that I got from a creationist today on abiogenesis and evolution, but mostly abiogenesis. And we just now got to chapter 2. You didn't really miss much for chapter 1.
Okay.
I mean, I could honestly say that about every chapter. You didn't miss the whole
book. You're not going to be missing anything on the remaining 9 chapters.
I was just going to say that, but I thought I'd better keep quiet.
Yeah, I think that can be said for a lot of literature. I think most people here know that I have a collection of creationist literature, and not just creationist literature, but literature that creationists refer to. Literature that they use as their references. Since I go out and I seek this stuff and I buy it, which is why I have every single textbook but one that Kent Hovind refers to when he talks about his lies in the textbooks.
Well, I mean, that allows them to say that they read technical literature without ever actually reading technical literature.
And the one textbook that I'm missing, that particular edition was extremely expensive. So rather than buy that edition, I bought the one before it and the one after it.
Right.
So it's like edition 9 or something like that, and I have 8 and 10. Yeah, so nothing has changed. So hi Tony.
Hi Jade. Actually, would you be able to make those available, like certain chapters or certain claims that it makes? Because one of the things that we were talking earlier is that Kent Hovind makes a lot of references, and then when you read the actual textbook, it doesn't say what he claims it is. And there's a lot of those that his description of how the Big Bang began, and I looked at it, and it looks like it's describing the formation of a galaxy, not a Big Bang.
Yeah, I give you PDFs of the relevant sources. Make them available to everybody. This scholar would definitely want it.
Okay, I will dig those out and make sure that I do have them all, and then I'll cross-reference it with his material. But yes, much of the time he misrepresents it. For example, he talks about Haeckel's embryos, and the thing is that the textbooks do use that as an example, as a bad example. But he neglects to mention that.
Yeah, they'll always, and John Wells makes the same mistake.
I've never even seen it in the textbooks.
Go out of their way to say that Haeckel's version of ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is just wrong.
I mean, as a student, in college, of all the textbooks I've ever had, I have never seen Haeckel's embryos in one of my biology or life science textbooks, whether in college or high school or middle school. Just I only know about it because of creationists who bring it up, which I think is really funny.
Well, you have to remember that most of the textbooks he's talking about are from the mid-1980s to maybe the early 1990s. Kent Hovind is stuck in the past.
Duh.
Not surprisingly. Yeah, duh. But yeah, as a matter of fact, go ahead.
Yeah, he basically, if you listen to an old or a Kent Hovind tape, and there are a few transcripts of that as well to see, and you look at what he's doing today, there's virtually no new material. He is so slow on the uptake that he's essentially retreading stuff that he has as his rote patter that he's been spewing out for the last 20 years.
Yes, but if you can find his earliest PowerPoints, I have them saved on another computer. Unfortunately, I can't get into that computer at the moment. But if you find his early PowerPoints, they are very, very vicious. He brings in Nazis a lot. They're anti-Semitic and so on and so forth.
Oh, he's an extreme nutball right winger. Remember the example when he would talk about the ACLU, he'd said that's the American Communist Lawyers Union.
Yes. He is, but he's moderated. He's moderated his presentations since his earlier ones to try to reach a wider audience. At least that's my assumption. So, but yeah,
they don't want to look like
make a note of that,
racists anymore, so they just kind of sweep under the rug their earlier views. Henry Morris was an old style Southern racist, and they don't give any impression of that today. Boy, they're all cuddly, sweet kumbaya.
Yeah. Well, there is a video, for example, of an exchange between Kent Hovind and Stephen Anderson, the nut job that has that church in Arizona, and they're both agreeing that homosexuals should be stoned. They should be killed.
How sweet of them! Yes, indeed.
Yes, yeah, nice. Yeah, they're marvelous people.
I think
I wanted to mention
homophobics should be stoned if we're going to start.
Yeah, there you go.
And stoned by give them some weed and tell them to chill out.
I know. I was gonna say that might really do a lot of good.
Bye, demonetization. Bye. See you later.
I can't even get monetized.
I just wanted to mention before we go on to what you're talking about, because obviously I'm interrupting you here, but yeah, I just got Jerry Bergman's second book, Silencing the Darwin Skeptics: The War Against Theists. This is volume 2 of The Slaughter of the Dissidents. It's, if anything, less substantive than the first one. But
that sounds like Bergman.
It's hysterical. It's so bad. One of the things I'm looking for, I don't know if not too long ago, couple 3 weeks, PZ Myers posted a link to the debate he had with Bergman, which is freaking hilarious.
Oh yeah, because it's great. One of my favorites.
Oh my goodness! But do you remember in there where Bergman claims that someone got fired for teaching the periodic table?
Yeah, he's. I mean, Bergman is nuts. He did claim that elements are irreducibly complex.
Oh,
yes. Yes, he did. That was
like this. I just
my favorite one. Bergman really came onto my scope when he made a claim about the Tasmanians, that Darwinism was responsible for exterminating the Tasmanian natives.
Yes.
And when I looked into the chronology of it, I discovered a tiny snag that the people involved in it were all deeply religious, and it was virtually done by the time Darwin was born.
Well, I don't think he made. Well, I looked up that claim one time because, oh man, I can't remember his name, but is this the same claim, where Darwin was asking people to bring him the skulls of Tasmanians to study?
Yeah. No, this is actually a separate one. Yeah, there's a bunch of tropes that go on about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's
this one.
I remember one of the Darwin biographers had a student who asked him about it, and he said, "What?" And so he looked into that, and it had evidently originated with the creationist. Surprise, surprise. Because actually, that reminds me, RJ. I said he wasn't a fact claimant, but I think he does actually make or claim to make some facts in this little booklet. There's one part where he references a paper. I can't remember where it is now. He references a paper and says that it says this one thing. But I found the paper. Oh, I found it. I found the page. The paper doesn't actually say anything regarding what he's saying it does.
Oh, that's what's called a scholarly mistake, isn't it?
I also, interestingly though, I can't find any other creationist sources who say it, because I was thinking
Done it
clearly
on his own. That's always, yeah, he would be technically then making a fact claim, a statement, and a wrong one in that. Yeah, I'd like to see the information on that. That'd be a fun one to track down, because it could be, there was always the possibility that he's riffed off of something that he didn't understand, that he is nicking a source that he read somewhere secondarily and was confused. And he then sprites it up that way. So that's there are a lot of fun detective stories to go on as to why people end up making the claims they do.
Because a lot of times these papers he's referencing are behind paywalls, and so I did manage to find this one, and so I did I did a text search, could not find any of the words that he uses. Or any of the numbers he references. Like he says, he mentions a 10% figure in this. The figure 10% does not show up in any of the contexts. He makes
if you can do a PDF of the page the claim is on, and if it also requires the bibliography segment to show what that source is, and that do a little PDF scan of that and toss it my way, because my curiosity is piqued, Jackson.
No, yeah, definitely. I'll probably shoot it to you on Twitter.
Could I ask who is the author of this book, and what is this particular claim? Just in case I've heard of it before.
This guy who wrote this little booklet, his name is Tim Stout. He's from the Rock Baptist Church in Greenville, Texas.
Oh dear.
Yeah. I met him today. He was distributing these booklets. Very interesting guy.
Handing them out for free.
Yeah, handing out misinformation for free, the best kind.
So what does this claim, though?
Oh, the claim in the paragraph?
Yeah.
He says, okay, quote, as an illustration, Johnston et al. 2001 developed a 176 nucleotide RNA molecule capable of copying strings of RNA. It spontaneously disintegrates while copying strings longer than about 14 nucleotides. Thus, it typically disintegrates before it has copied less than 10% of itself. This illustrates just how severely RNA's short lifetime impacts abiogenesis. 176 nucleotides is much too many to reasonably appear in a single step. Yet, even this is not long enough to give the copying efficiency required for it to make a copy of itself before it spontaneously decays. This is another disconnect between natural behavior and the requirements of abiogenesis, close quote. So none of that was quoted from another source. He was just basically writing all that stuff out. I found the paper.
What was the date of the paper?
2001.
But what's does he have the first initial paper on the ball?
So he has the paper. The paper is RNA catalyzed RNA polymerization, accurate and general RNA template primer extension. And so you can find the paper for free. But it does
because I don't think I have it in my bibliography.
RNA catalyzed RNA polymerization. But yeah, I found the source. That 176 figure, not anywhere in the paper. Does not appear anywhere. So I have no idea where he got that. The 10% figure does not appear anywhere in the paper in that context. In fact, it says that it catalyzed 1088 of 1100 nucleotides in the paper. So I
which
just
seems like kind of a good thing for abiogenesis.
Yeah, right. But I'm just trying to figure out where the heck he even got that idea, because I can't. It has no sources outside of this. Outside of this booklet.
But they're not required to give you sources. That's what scientists do, Jackson.
But I couldn't find any references.
This guy is apparently giving a source, and therefore, the moment he gives a source, it's the Dracula rule that I use in that Dracula can't enter the house until you invite him in, but once you invite him in, then he can come in anytime you like. The moment a person cites a source, then they are fair game. All of its content is now liable. That presumably fell under their eyeballs. If they can't understand the content of it, that's their problem. But they are on the hook of the content of the source.
I get what you're saying, RJ, but you're dealing with people that don't think the rules apply to them. So it's just like you're just
of course
expecting them to like follow rules that scientists and other academics put into place, but they're most of the time they're not educated. They don't understand what the rules are, or they just don't care. So it's just, you're dealing with people that push a lot of information just because it suits their narrative, and they really don't care about trying to back it up with anything outside of what they decide to put on paper.
Right, but they usually don't wholesale make up stuff. That's pretty rare in creationism.
I don't know. I mean, if you're quoting Ken Ham, as a source, then you're making up stuff.
Well, no, he's not making up stuff. He's taking it from other earlier creationists. He didn't really make up his own stuff. So usually you can track, like we did for his, like Ken Ham made the claim that the average dinosaur size is that of a sheep. Well, we found out where he got it. He got it from Jurassic Park, right?
Okay. Well, but that's
there's very little.
There's
there are two things.
There's no original work here from any of these individuals. They're quoting things that don't exist, really, and they're using those as their citations. The rules don't apply to people who don't respect the rules anyway. So if they don't respect the rules, then they're going to use citations for what we don't consider an actual academic journal. You can't possibly expect them to back up anything that they say in a pamphlet they hand to you that's full of propaganda.
I don't know.
Well, there's also
go ahead.
He was talking about the minimum number of nucleotides needed to be able to copy itself. In 2014, October, Jonathan Schimpanzé and Gerald Joyce wrote a paper called A Cross-Chiral RNA Polymerase Ribosome. And what they did is they had a sequence of 83 nucleotides, RNA nucleotides. And this kind of solves two very common creationist arguments. It was just 83 nucleotides long, and it began copying itself, but it kept copying itself from left to right. I mean, in terms of its chirality, right back to left again. It was just crossing back and every time it would reproduce itself, it'd go from left to right, then back again, and it got more and more efficient as it continued to copy itself. They're still conducting the experiment. I haven't seen where it ended, but if you guys like, I can actually post a link to the paper. It's actually
I'm putting
available.
The information up on it. Anybody can Google it now. It's in my bibliography from Nature. And so you wouldn't. It'd be behind a firewall from Nature. I'll find out whether or not it may be available. Posted. I think Gerald Joyce posts a lot of his stuff open access.
Yeah.
It's funny you brought that up, Tony, because they actually bring up Stout brings up the problem of cross chirality, but he calls it a problem because he has no idea that cross chirality even happens. He just says, "Oh, things have handedness and they can't work in presence of the other," and that's it. It's like he's just not heard of this. He has no idea. Which is funny.
He's been off of material. I was going to point out that among creationists, some of the things that are very rare, they're really scrupulous in how they copy their stuff. So they're honestly taking material that they've read in their creationist sources, carefully copying them down. Sometimes that's how you can find out where they copied them from, because they're very meticulous about it. Very few examples of inventing shit out of mid-air, of actually inventing a non-existent source. And even the examples of what Jackson has just brought up, of where the content doesn't seem to have anything to do with what they're maintaining, that's fairly rare. Usually there's a little teeny nugget of truthiness that they're riffing off of. So
Jackson's just total disconnect.
Much more blatant and fairly rare for them to be going like, "Did you read the same paper?"
Yeah, it's just complete disconnect. It's like he didn't read the paper. I honestly don't think he read this paper, or he's reading some other paper I can't find.
That's that's why I don't really kind of engage them so much because.
But that's the fun part, Mel.
But they don't read the papers, and then I get bored. I'm like, do I just rip apart this person openly on the internet, and then they end up having even therapy afterwards or something?
Toss them over to me, Mel, and I'll be happy to finish the job on there because that's right up my alley.
It's like the last person I did that with. I had an entire bottle of wine before I got on the actual show, and that was the only reason why it went that long.
That was hilarious.
I was pretty chill because I was just. Otherwise, if I hadn't had that bottle of wine, it'd been over in about 10 minutes. So I'm like, I'm done. I'm done.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
I'm gonna hop off of here because I spent like 9 hours.
Oh, Mel, I was actually just getting to the part that I wanted to ask you about. Believe it or not.
Okay, well, ask me before I.
Sorry, I'm sorry. We're the first part of chapter 2 is just describing the Miller-Urey experiment, which he thinks is still relevant today. In fact, he says at one point that scientists are talking about it to this very day. It's like, no. Maybe creation.
It has its flaws, but it's historical in itself.
It's still alluded to.
Well, I mean, he's referring to it as in this booklet, he's referring to it as though this is like the definitive work on abiogenesis. Like nothing has been done since the Miller-Urey experiment.
Oh,
right?
Gosh.
Yeah, so he has this little chart. Turn on my camera for a moment. He has this little chart right here. This is what I sent you, Mel.
Yeah, I know. I sent you information. There is information about formic acid.
Right. Yeah. So he labels most of these as contaminants.
Yeah.
I mean, formic acid. You said it was fairly weak.
Yeah, it's a weak acid. A strong acid relieves all of its hydrogens, and usually at a very low pH. And so if you put it even at higher pHs, it's still deprotonated. So if you're talking about formic acid can be used in what we call separation of proteins and protein purification. So it can give off hydrogen ions. If there's a whole lot of formic acid, then that would be a problem in regards to amino acids and proteins because it's donating all those hydrogen ions and it can bust up those molecules in that regard. Because the fact of the matter is when you're linking amino acids, that's a dehydration reaction. And so you lose water molecules out of that, and then they connect together. Well, what's water made of? Hydrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. But if those particular hydrogens stay protonated on those particular amino acids and they never come off, then you can't have the connection to form a protein. And so in the presence of a lot of formic acid, that would be a problem because you have all of these excess amounts of hydrogen ions keeping those amino acids protonated. But if it's just a small amount, that's not a big deal. But it is used in my field that I'm in right now is protein purification. Formic acid can be used to elute a particular protein substance off of a column if you're trying to separate one protein from a whole bunch of others, and then you just throw some formic acid on there. Depending on the column, it can knock it off because it adds that hydrogen ion to it and it pops that protein right off. So the argument I think he's trying to make is that formic acid in high amounts would be considered a contaminant in that regard. But it is a weak acid, and you would have to have a lot of it for it to be a problem in regards to amino acid formation as well as peptides.
Yeah, that's pretty much what he is arguing. But I also wrote in the margins here, which I got from, because there was a paper, I think I got from one of Tony's videos, that formamide, which is an amide of formic acid, was used to make nucleobases in an experiment.
You can use formic acid and formamide and all of these to generate various amino acids as well as it was nucleobases, like nucleotides. Yeah, you should be able to, because I mean, essentially you're talking about a carbon-based type of molecule. And since that carboxyl group, or that COOH that's on the end of the formic acid, that hydrogen pops off and pops right back on again, it makes it quite easy to be able to use it as, as a connector, because carboxylic acids are found quite a bit in living systems. They can donate and pick up hydrogen ions.
Well, just to give you to support what Jackson said, yeah, you did. You may have actually gotten that from one of my videos. You could have gotten it anywhere, but
it was the first place I heard it.
Oh well, hey, awesome.
There we go.
But I was just for the audience there. There's the paper is by Martin Ferris et al. And it's called "High Energy Chemistry of Formamide: A Unified Mechanism of Nucleobase Formation," and they used a laser to simulate extreme heat from an asteroid or meteorite impact, to simulate the heat to generate nucleotides out of formamide. They found all 4 RNA nucleobases.
That's pretty cool.
Pretty intense stuff. Intense heat.
I want that paper.
What's that?
He said he wants the paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
RJ, I'll find it for you.
Oh, that's easy.
I've got a link for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
those are all open access, so that's nice.
I can't put it in chat, so somebody else.
I'll give you a wrench, Tony. Hold on a sec. Let me find.
Give him a wrench. Give him a wrench.
Then you can put one in there. How far? Oh, wait, there you are. Okay, Tony, you're a moderator now, so you can add one in there.
Let's try it.
Well, I'm gonna hop off.
Bam! There you go, guys.
I gotta get up at like 6 in the morning every day.
Oh man, sorry to hear that, Mel. That sounds unpleasant.
It's every day, 6 in the morning. So.
Well, thank you for coming on and donating your expertise.
I was happy to do it. This is a lot of fun. It's like talking to you, Jackson. It's cool.
Who, me?
Yeah, we had hot dogs together in New Orleans.
We did, in fact, eat very interesting hot dogs.
It was a lot of fun. I had a
You're in Vegas, aren't you, Tony?
Blackberry jam.
Yep, I live in Vegas.
You're on the other side of the world.
I lived there 3.5 years, man. We have to talk soon, Tony. You have to be on my channel and talk to me. And stuff.
I'd enjoy it. That'd be great.
Okay. Well, are you on Google Plus? Do we follow each other there, or Twitter or something?
I am unfortunately really impaired when it comes to social media. That's why I do not know how to promote myself. I'm on Twitter and I just turned it off because it just bugs me all day long.
Okay,
So,
well, I'll just shoot you a message. I can't say word. Message on YouTube. I'll send you a message on YouTube. So
sounds good. I'll respond and we'll get together.
Okay. All right. Well, bye, guys. Thanks for having me on here.
Good night, bye.
Bye, man.
And I'll even put in another link here because a more recent paper from the same bunch is on from 2017 on the formation of nucleobases.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, also in PNAS, just from last year. Here we go. Formation of nucleobases in a miliary reducing atmosphere. Whoops, I gotta shut the my thing is too long.
Speaking of miliary atmosphere, he presents a list of 6 big problems, and the first one is origin of life processes require an untypical initial assortment of raw materials, as though the chemicals necessary for abiogenesis are just lying around.
Yeah. Well, the neat thing about the Miller-Urey experiment. Initially, of course, it was based on a pure methane ammonia format that was being proposed as origin of life stuff back in the 1920s and 30s, Orgel and all that bunch. And then pretty soon it was pointed out, that actually probably wasn't the primordial atmosphere. So they corrected the experiments to do it with a more plausible atmosphere. And they got a bunch of kind of odd gunk, and they didn't really have a way of analyzing it. So they just kept them in the vials and didn't bother much about it. Well, I think about 2010 or so, some scientists went through and looked at those fresh with the new techniques that we have that could look at way better analysis. And it turns out that when they had adjusted for the better atmosphere, they actually were better at producing amino acids than the original experiment was.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah. The The second one is origin of life processes innately produce more contaminants than useful product. He doesn't ever explain. He doesn't explain anything about contaminants, like none of the properties of these chemicals as to why they're called contaminants. Just nothing. No discussion of contaminants whatsoever. He said, origin of life processes do not provide multiply required products in useful ratios. Somehow he determined what a useful ratio is.
Without ever defining it.
Exactly, never defined it. Number 4 is the argument of chirality, where he totally does not know about the cross-chiral experiments, which I will be happy to inform him of.
Work on how chiral things get skewed in prebiotic contexts. I keep on picking up technical literature on it all the time, so it's not nearly the problem that they're making it out if all they're doing is just quote mining.
Oh yeah, I'm very excited to share that information with him, because I have it straight from the horse's mouth that he will correct whatever errors I can point out to him.
Take him at his word. Make him stand to his word. Make him actually correct stuff on there. If he ever bumps into any of the paleontology, and that's where he'd be on my turf.
Oh, he does. He does later, and I tear into that chapter.
I can't remember which one it was, but Jade mentioned one where someone deliberately quote mined, but it was something so obscure that it was really hard to find where it was, but she's got so much literature that she found it. Can you remember what that was, Jade?
Well, there are a couple of them I can think of. Are you talking about Niels Herbert Nielsen by any chance?
I don't know. I don't know this.
Okay. Well, that was a popular one in some places. He people say, the famous quote, the one famous quote is that, and you can find it in Conservapedia, by the way, under his name. That he had, yeah, I know, good old. Yeah, it was a homeschool project that turned into the bullshit that is. But no, he said he did this experiment for 40 years and found no evolution. And what's interesting is that people continually misquote it, and Nephilim Free has gone so far as to say that he's a bacteriologist and he did this experiment for 40 years in using bacteria. No, he was a botanist. The experiment he's talking about is a multiple hybrid of Salix, which is a willow tree. And I have all that. It took me years to find those books. There's a couple of quotes by Nielsen that are used by creationists, and it took me years to find those books, and I finally ordered them from Germany. But yes, I have those. I also have a book from 1960 something about tree rings that has been used to misquote, and I have another book about it's sort of a mathematical conference. I think at UC Davis. I forget. I don't have it handy right at the moment. That they misquote about so like neo-Lamarckianism. It's that they pick these things. That's like from 1969, 1970. But they pick these really obscure references, like this one, which I happen to have right here. The one from it's from 1965 or 66. I could pick it up and look, but I'm not going to bother. It's about research on tree rings in tree branches, and it's a government publication, but it's rather obscure, and but I happen to have found it. I think I found the only one in existence, to tell you the truth.
That's why it'd be fun to have as much of that made available to the scholarly community, so we can all share the joy.
Right, and it's a really good book. It's very informative. I've learned a lot from it. But again, it's a complete misunderstanding of how tree ring research is done. I'm actually, by the way, James, working on this particular book, which is why it's handy. I'm looking up the references they're using, and I'm cross-referencing it with the pages in the book, and I'm going to scan the book and put it all together in a PDF so that it will be available. Not the entire book. It's a pretty big book. It's not a little book.
Yeah.
But they only
but at least the salient points on there, because the cardinal rule of methods approach is don't take their word for it. That if they're citing primary source literature, the odds are if you can track it down, you're going to find their head stuffed up their ass.
Right. And I'm trying to find, I found one source that used this book, but again, a lot of my stuff's on a computer that is down at the moment. I can't get into. So I found one source that uses this book, but I'm trying to find another source that used this book, because that source is the one that clued me into the book. Because they are completely misunderstanding. They're talking about how, okay, let me briefly go. They're talking about how trees grow more than one tree ring per year. Okay. Well, there's certain, caveats. There are certain trees that just simply aren't used for tree ring dating because they grow more than one tree ring per year. It's like trees in the tropics or trees that grow more than one tree ring.
Normally the seasonal ones are the ones you want to use. You can tell wide versus narrow, bad weathers and all that kind of stuff.
Well, one of the problems is what's called lensing. And if a tree undergoes some damage, whether it's maybe it's in a storm and a rock hits it, or an insect digs into it, or a squirrel gets at it or something, a damage to the vascular cambrium, the growing portion, which is right underneath the bark, will cause it to grow a partial ring, which is called a lens. That's really obvious, and when scientists see that, they they'll take like another sample to double check, or even just cut the tree down to take a look at it, because it's lensing. It's not an entire tree ring. It's just an extra partial ring due to damage. But the main problem with what the one source I did find has been talking about is simply this. When they were checking these trees, one of the things they discovered is, not surprisingly when you think about it, that the trees that are at the outside of the forest or the woodland are not the best ones to use for tree ring dating, because they're exposed more to the elements and to things like storms or storm damage. That's where you're going to find multiple tree rings. That's where you're going to find irregularities. So if you want to do accurate tree ring dating, you pick trees that are in the middle of the forest or the woodland, not trees on the outside. That's the point that this creationist that's arguing against tree rings neglected.
Yeah, data suppression.
Exactly. They're only picking out the part where it says, they're only picking out the part where it says, look, this data isn't any good because they're getting all this. Yeah, no. There's a caveat to the whole thing, which is you don't use these trees. We did all this research, big book. We did all this research, and you don't use these trees.
Yeah, 90% of anti-evolution apologetics consist of data omission. They're cherry picking tiny snippets, and when you read the original material, you find out what they're suppressing. And if the source is quite clear about what its content is, the moment they cite it, you got them by the balls.
Yes. Yeah.
Literally and figuratively. Yeah.
Literally. My all-time favorite example of a source that when you found out what it was the opposite of a legitimate source being misrepresented. It was an illegitimate source being presented as legitimate. It was this stuff from the Canadian Journal of Anthropology, and it's related to human evolution issues. And it sounds like a journal, Canadian Journal of Anthropology. Yes. Wow. And by the weirdest of coincidence, you won't find any of it online because I looked. But my jaw dropped when I discovered that my alma mater, Eastern Washington University, had it in their stacks. They had subscribed to it. So I was literally able to go down and see it. It wasn't a journal of anthropology. It was this pamphlet that was put out by a bunch of Canadian creationists for a few years. Well, and the moment I found the original material, I go,
for Creation Research. Yeah. There you go.
Just to let you know, I did pull it out. I have it. I have the book in a plastic bag because it's so old, and it's an old paper bound book, and some of the pages are falling off, so I keep it in this plastic bag. The title is "The Classification and Multiplicity of Growth Layers in the Branches of Trees at the Extreme Lower Forest Border." by Waldo Glock, R.A. Studhalter, and Charlene Adjuter. And it's publication 44421. It's part of the Smithsonian Miscellaneous Collections, Volume 140, Number 1. Published June 17th, 1960. Very recent book they're using here.
Right, yeah. Oh, that's always a dead giveaway when you see people relying on extremely old sources.
Oh, yeah.
And it's even worse in biology field, because for all practical purposes, you should be suspicious of stuff that's trying to talk about developmental genetics that's before 1995, because that was before homeobox genes. So, you know, they're going, woo, why are you suddenly citing something from 1985?
Now, let me just read you this one quote. It's called Dating Criteria. You see, they ignore the stuff. They ignore the stuff that doesn't help them. This is from page 287, should anyone ever get the book. The discovery that growth layers could be dated with exactness by the incidence of natural frost injury and recovery led directly to an intensive inquiry into where and when growth occurs. Altogether, 4 methods were used to date growth layers: natural frost effects, artificial frost effects, periodic tip growth measurements, and the relation of tip growth to diameter growth. Materials used herein have been dated absolutely unless otherwise noted. And then it goes on to talk a bit more about them. Yeah.
What would be really great to do then is to have the creationist misquotation reference, and then all of the citation trails page by page by page, so that all of that can be tracked through and made available, because that's gold. I want that in TIP, Jade. I want that in TIP.
Okay, I will work on that. There's lots of you know, drawings and diagrams and stuff like that. But no, it goes and one of the things they point out, first of all, they are measuring branches. They're not measuring trunks. But that doesn't mean anything, because in here they also point out, because I wondered about that. So, of course, I read the book. Well, I didn't read the complete book. It's like 200 and some pages, but it's not like big print or anything. It's almost 300 pages without the plates and stuff like that. Lots of lovely plates. And they pointed out that as far as they can tell from the research they did, that the tree rings in growth layers match the tree rings in the trunks. So this was specifically research on growth layers and tree branches.
Yeah, dendrochronology is a long and meticulous area. It requires great meticulousness, because you're looking at little teeny tiny things. Same thing as trying to do the ice layers in Greenland things. If you're not a detail person, this is not a career for you.
Oh,
no,
I also have a fun little bit about quotes, about quote mining, since that is what we were talking about. We were talking about quote mining.
Yeah.
I have to turn on my camera again. Sorry, you guys have to see my face. So I can show all of you this little bit. Can you guys see it?
It's pretty blurry.
What happened?
Hold on a sec. Let me go. Okay. Well, if you'll notice, so there are these little indented quotes right here, and 4 of the 6 quotes have check marks next to them. And they have check marks because they're all from the same source, which is a creationist source.
Ooh.
I found out, so I was looking at them. I looked up the first quote because I interestingly, he didn't like say what paper it was from until the very end after he quoted all of them. So I looked up the quote, found the full paper. The first quote says, "Most of the added organics and phosphate." It says most of the added organics and phosphate were removed from solution with half times measured in minutes to a few hours, right? So that's the quote. And it turns out that quote is quote mined, believe it or not. What a surprise. He quote mines from a paper. Crap, I don't remember what the paper is. Was it Deemer et al., 2006? The paper is titled Self-Assembly Processes in the Prebiotic Environment. So basically, it's a whole paper talking about places where life couldn't have originated. He's basically narrowing narrowing the possible origin of life places down, right? So he quote
PNAS
mines
2006.
Yes, and he basically just quote mines. He makes it sound like the chemicals that are necessary for life are just disappearing in the environment, and then that's bad for abiogenesis. Well, actually, that's kind of the whole point of the paper, right? Because he's talking about different environments in which these chemicals are disappearing or they're not holding up, and so it's not likely to form life. And so 4 of the other 5 quotes are all from, interestingly, an article by Russell Humphreys titled "Zircons: God's Tiny Nuclear Laboratories." So yeah, so he cited Russell Humphreys. I guess he didn't actually read the paper, which makes sense because they're all quote mines. It's like the whole point of the paper is to figure out what are not good environments for abiogenesis, and then he's pulling out all these quotes, basically saying these aren't good environments. It's like, well, no, duh. That's
100% of the abiogenesis quotes are generated from ultimately the people doing the work, and they're taken out of context because no anti-evolutionist does abiogenesis research. None. So all they're doing is playing parasite, skipping in and cherry picking little bliplets. But the scientists want to know the truth. They want to know what the facts are. And so they are always calling attention to the problems or difficulties in their discipline. And then the creationist comes in and picks up just the parts that are the problems, and they don't mention the progress that's being made. I put a link in there about, not a direct link, but the title of the paper from that, Philosophical Transactions, Royal Society. It's probably available open access.
It is actually available in open access. I actually just downloaded it myself.
I got it. All right.
And that also is an important life lesson from the fact that because we live in the internet era, nobody has an excuse to not get at this stuff. It's not because it's behind some sacred wall where they have lions and tigers and lasers preventing you to get to it. No, everybody can get to this information, and therefore the only excuse is that they're effing lazy.
That seems to be the case.
But James, it's not the only excuse. You can't expect them to go to a source that will disprove everything they say. I mean, but
Tortukins will actually give you those gold mines. Every once in a while, doing a Garrett Hardin was an example, and he wasn't a creationist, but that's example where some people get so enamored of their model that they will actually give you the link to the work that blows their argument to smithereens, and they don't seem to notice it.
No, because they haven't read it.
It's not restricted to creationists.
You know, I had a similar one some years ago. A guy called Outrowl tried doing that. And he basically used something. He was trying to say that Hitler was against the church. And the reality was that that wasn't exactly true. If any priests or whatever said something bad against the Nazi state, then they'd come down hard on them. But as long as they stayed out of politics, they were perfectly fine. So what happened was this guy tried to use a piece of source material to prove it, and he used Inside the Third Reich by
Shire.
Sorry, Speer.
William L. Shire.
Albert Speer. And
him. Oh, his biography. Yeah, okay.
And what he did was let's see if I can find the quote because I have got it around. But it was, hang on, let me find it. I've got it right. I know where it is because he had the picture.
Well, Jackson and I know about how Dinesh D'Souza is one that, boy, it's a joy to track down his primary sources, because, boy, that guy sometimes just doesn't know how to read. So this sounds like the same kind of context here. Ideologues get so enamored of the goal that they just grab at wherever they can.
Yeah. The thing about it is, I'd been hammering back and forth with the guy for a week, and just neither of us would concede. And the thing about it is, I got Asperger's, so when I get a bee in my bonnet about something, I just keep going. I'm really bad at letting things like that go. So
can I make a recommendation? I hate to interrupt, but can we actually? The way you pronounce Asperger's, I like the way you pronounce that G, because it keeps us from having a silly, immature laugh when we say Asperger's.
I know.
I think that's
Someone's
the best.
been watching South Park.
No, actually, the first time I heard about it was a girlfriend I had was watching some kind of supermodel thing, and one of the models had Asperger's, is how she pronounced it, and I went, "There's no such thing as Asperger's." Turns out she was a psychologist and she knew all about it. So anyway, please go on. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, it's fine. Let's have a look. I'm just going to find the other part that goes with it.
Ooh, because that pops up. Yeah, I've seen that one pop up in the apologetic stuff several times.
Yeah. The problem is that I'm going to have to memorize the quote. I've got it around somewhere, but it'd take me a couple of minutes to find it, and I want to keep on the frame. So it's our Germany's misfortune to have the wrong religion. The Mohammedan religion would have been much more compatible to us than Christianity. Adolf Hitler is the quote. However, the quote comes from the Albert Speer book, Inside the Third Reich. And what he says something like Hitler had been impressed by some like Saudi princes or whatever, some distinguished Arabs. And they'd explained that way back in the 4th century that they'd infiltrated all the way into Europe and had been defeated at the Battle of Tours. And that, and sort of Hitler thought this was great, except for the idea that he gave it a twist that the Aryan Islamized, it would have been Islamized Germans that would have ruled the world, because the Arabs would have been unable to cope with the powerful Aryans and would have been sent packing. And then he went on to say something along the lines of, the Mohammedan religion would have been better for us because they regarded fighting spirit as the important part, and he also mentioned the Japanese, as well. So it was all about fighting spirit and had nothing to do with religion.
Yeah.
Hitler
was a squishy religionist. He didn't like anything that was weak, so that was part of the thing. The Christianity, turn the other cheek aspect, he didn't like that much. And remember too that there was a connection between a lot of fascists and proto-fascists in the Islamic world. That the Ba'ath Party that Saddam Hussein came from, they started out as a pro-fascist party in the 1930s. So there was a strong interconnection of stuff that goes all the way back, even before that, to where the German Empire had wanted to build a railway system all the way down to Baghdad to compete with the British. And so there had been a lot of cross currents that went on even before Nazis came along the scene. Very little of dumb in the world ever pops up fresh. It's always got centuries of provenance behind it.
Unless it's completely made up.
It just so happens I found it. I knew it was around. Gosh, I just lost it. Try again. Okay. So Hitler had been much impressed by a scrap of history he'd learned from a delegation of distinguished Arabs when the Mohammedans had attempted to penetrate beyond France into Central Europe during the 8th century, so not before. His visitors told him they'd been driven back at the Battle of Tours. Had the Arabs won this battle, the world would be Mohammedan today, for theirs was a religion that believed in spreading faith by the sword and subjugating all nations to that faith. The Germanic people would have become heirs to that religion. Such a creed was perfectly suited to the Germanic temperament, Hitler said. That the conquering Arabs, because their racial inferiority, would have in the long run been unable to contend with the harsher climates and conditions of the country. They would not have kept down the more vigorous natives, and it would ultimately have been not Arabs but Islamized Germans that would have stood at the head of this Mohammedan empire. Hitler concluded this historical speculation by remarking, here's the quote, "You see, it's been our misfortune to have the wrong religion. Why didn't we have the religion of the Japanese, who regard sacrifice for the fatherland as the highest good? The Mohammedan religion too would have been much more compatible than Christianity. Why did it have to be Christianity with its meekness and flabbiness? It's remarkable that even before the war, he sometimes went on, today the Siberians, the White Russians, and the people of the steppes live extremely healthy lives. For that reason, they're better equipped for development, and in the long run, biologically superior to Germans." This was an idea.
At the very least, attributing it to Hitler, you would need to put in according to Albert Speer.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the as soon as you remove, why didn't we have the religion of the Japanese, who regard sacrifice for the fatherland as the highest good? That changes the context of it completely.
That's like a quote actually that we were talking about earlier with Ager, this guy named Derek Ager, who, if I remember correctly, I can't find the quote at this moment, but he says it must be significant that nearly all the evolutionary stories I learned as a student ... have now been debunked. If I remember correctly, he's referring to some group of mollusks. I can't quite remember all the information on it, but I believe he's referring to a group of mollusks and their evolutionary history. And then he's talking about that when he became an adult and he's actually doing research on it, what he learned turned out to be false. So he's not referring to evolution as a whole, just as one specific group of animals. Of course, that's, like you pointed out, it's left out with a little ellipse. So much important context is all just left out.
Oh, I love dots.
I have to comment on that because when I started college, I got sick, I couldn't finish it, and then when I went back to college in my 30s to study music, but I also took science. I took chemistry and organic chemistry and calculus, and where I went to school we had zoology and botany, which I loved taking it that way. And I did that just because I love science. So I'd already had all those classes, but I took them over again. I took astronomy in college 3 times. People are sometimes amazed by that, but I point out that the reason I took it 3 times is it changed a lot in between. First time I took it was in 1969, and then I took it in the mid-1970s and then the mid-1980s. It changed a lot in those intervals. But anyway, about the thing. So one of the things we had to do for our zoology class was to draw a phylogenetic tree. And, it had to be accurate. We had to have all the branches at the right place and have an explanation for it and whatever. So as I was doing this, I got hung up on mollusks. So I spent hours in the University of California, Santa Cruz library. I was not going there. I was going to our local community college, looking up, evolutionary history of mollusks. And there were 3 possible, evolutionary histories, because it's not exact. Are you going to be looking at the anatomy, or are you going to be looking at the embryology? If you're going to look at the larval stages of mollusks, it was very complex. So I finally made my decision, put on the trees. As a matter of fact, I kind of neglected everything else. I kind of had to rush through arthropods because I spent so much time on mollusks. So I made my decision, and this was after a lot of work. And a couple of years ago, I decided, I wonder what became of mollusks, so to speak. So I looked up the recent work, the genetic work on mollusk, and I just started laughing my ass off because it's nowhere near anything that what people thought back then. And this is in the mid-1980s. And this is, legitimate research in the mid-1980s. What our genetics showed is, for one thing, we had these paraphyletic clades in there. And it was just, I'm just looking at this thing and laughing my head off. And then I later I found my old phylogenetic tree, and I compared the two of them. And even when I think of it, I start giggling. So things have changed so very much. It's astonishing. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means we had limited information at the time. Yeah. And then you mentioned Molly's just clicked that in my head. It just, yeah.
What a fun,
because they would just look at for one thing, if you're only dealing with living forms, then you're trying to figure out what was going on in deep time with an ancestral group. And so they would look at the developmental biology, they would look at the morphology. But once you had the genetics to look at, you could start seeing at the detail levels that things that were looking similar actually were convergent based upon other elements that were much more salient in terms of deep biology. So it's fun, but it doesn't mean that they were doing bad science. It just is they were doing the best they could with the information at their hand.
Right. And
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I have a running statement that I make to people, which is that I spent a lot of time in the 19th century. And thank you, Google Books, because I love to look up what the status was of science in the 19th century. What got me started on this were creationists, because they kept going back to Darwin and Lyell and all these people, and Haeckel and so on and so forth. And so I started looking up original material. And it's utterly fascinating, and it's a lot of fun. That the part that they miss is that if you go back and you look these things up, even back then, they are very tentative. Nobody is saying, this descended from this, or this is what this is. I looked up, I really wish I could remember what it is, but it's a particular fossil from South America, rhinoceros-like thing. And I found some creationists commenting on how, evolutionists were all wrong. They didn't even know what this is. Well, you know what? I went back and I looked at when it was first found and what they thought of it. Really nice write-up. I have it on the computer. I can't get into it, unfortunately. I'll probably find it again. A really nice write-up that discusses what they think it is. They go, okay, it has these now remember, back then they could only go by morphology, physiology, and embryology. When you're dealing with fossils, you're pretty much stuck with morphology. So it's looking at it and it's going, well, it has these features that look like a rhinoceros, has these features that look like a tapir. And then it has these other features that are reminiscent of, I think, ground sloth, something like that. So they went through all that and explaining everything, and then he comes to his conclusion. Given all this information, I suggest that it belongs to this particular family and for these reasons. That's the way science is really done. But when you look at what these creationists are doing, they go, oh, they were wrong because they said it was thus and such. And to give you a really good idea, and I do have this saved on this computer, I found a reference in 19th century that classified frogs with reptiles. I also found a reference that classified the crocodilians with lizards. Does that mean they were wrong? No. Well, yes, they were wrong, but they had reasons for that. Stop and think about the outline of a crocodile or an alligator and the outline of a lizard. And where I live, we have a lot of alligator lizards, so that makes real sense to me.
Well, they're not gonna stop and think about context, because for them it's about scoring points. It's not about actually figuring out what is true.
And worse, what you look for is what they're missing, is that they're not explaining what they think happened with them. Because every single one of those animals would have to be classifiable according to their creationist typology or kindology or baraminology. And their failure to do that is showing that they have no model to apply to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed. Also, the last thing I wanted to point out in the chapter 3 was that he makes a whole argument about the statistical improbability of life originating, and then he also basically doesn't understand how proteins form or anything like that. So he makes this whole argument that it's all random, which is precisely that's because that's normal. It's all random.
Yeah, you're supposed to have an entire organism just thrown together like that tornado in a junkyard and make a 747, and that just can't happen. And I've got some quotes that I've got, which got probabilities that show it's like 10 to the umpteenth power, and so that completely disproves it.
Exact. That almost word for word the chapter. No,
that's it. You get that over and over and over again. But it's garbage in, garbage out. What is the probability of an event that you don't have any primary source data on?
Right. Jade, you said you had a source or something. Did I mishear you?
Huh?
I thought you said you were looking for something.
I was, but I will find it later. And by the way, I'm going to look up your, 176 nucleotides things. I suspect that what happened there is that your creationist friend was using a reference like Answers in Genesis, and when he went to copy the reference, he copied the wrong reference. I've seen that happen before.
Well, see, yeah, I would actually be surprised if that were the case. They're usually pretty serious about copying their. I mean, even still, I couldn't find it anywhere, like a reference to.
But it does happen. There was just a case when I was researching one of Andrew Snelling's papers where there were two articles in the same journal issue, and he wrote down the wrong one. And I realized that he was actually meaning the other one that actually was talking about the subjects. And he got the title and everything all wrong on it. And then there is the case with Hush and Steve Austin, where they wrote down this particular claim. It was about mollusks. And they wrote it down. And it was in a pending publication. And I started hunting around for it and found I couldn't find a damn thing about it. And I actually contacted the scientist down, I think it's the University of Colorado, and he had no idea what the hell they were talking about either. So somebody had written down some presentation that was somewhere by someone and must have written something down wrong. And when they got around to copying it for their argument, they never fact-checked themselves. They didn't check to see whether or not it had actually happened.
I mean that's probably the case. It's just that none of the information seems to match up anywhere. So he found some source that is obscure or something, somewhere.
I did find a couple of references to 176 nucleotides. One had to do with the hybrid computer science, something. It had to do with something with computer science, comparing computer science to the human genome or something. But I'll look it up a little bit further because I'm pretty good at digging these things up.
Yeah,
but my guess is because they'll sometimes there's a whole bunch of references at the bottom of some of these articles, and it's very easy for someone because people are lazy. Okay, so they'll highlight, copy and paste, and they'll copy and paste, and they will accidentally copy and paste the wrong one.
That's true.
Nephilim Free has this little spiel he gives, and he gives these quotes from evolutionists that supposedly challenge evolution. And I giggle every time he does it because he mentions this one woman. I can't think of her name right now, but you kind of can't miss it because it's practically the only woman he mentions. And he gets the wrong person. He keeps repeating it and repeating it and repeating it.
The quote could be Lynn Margulis.
What? No, it's not Lynn Margulis. It's somebody else. No. But he's he repeatedly, the quote he's saying, she didn't say. Somebody else said it altogether.
It's funny you mentioned Margulis because this booklet references Margulis a few times.
Oh, yeah, she pops up in there because she's enough of an authority figure, and she shut her mouth off on enough subjects that there's usually a few things that they can quote miner on.
Well, he didn't bring her up for the usual stuff that natural selection is not the driver of evolution, but symbiotic relationships. He didn't bring her up for that. He quoted her from a book she wrote in '96 titled "The End of Science." So I don't remember where exactly it is. I'll have to.
And as we all know, science ended in 1996. So that
most certainly did. We're living in a post-science age right now.
I don't see any science going on now, man.
Yeah.
My favorite Nephilim Free reference I ever heard was when he was trying to disprove the translocation of species, and he did an ad hoc. Here's the paper to prove it, and it was a paper from a zoo on how to move animals from Africa to a zoo.
I've heard about that. The legendary translocation misquote.
Yeah, well, and it wasn't just a misquote. He gave his entire talk with the background being that paper.
Yeah.
And I'm the first one who caught it. I think Fiona caught it like right after I did. And we're just sitting there laughing our head off because he's going on and on about translocation. Right behind him is the paper, which we could even read from the outside to see what it was about.
What was the point they were making about translocation?
They were talking about the creationists. I don't remember. I was too busy laughing at how do we translocate the species from here to here safely? It's just hysterical.
Were they trying to do it to show there couldn't have been dispersals over time, or what?
Yeah, that's the problem. I don't remember. All I remember about it is laughing so hard because he's got that paper up behind him. Scholarship
is a contact sport, and the more people that realize it, the more entertaining it can be, because it's the area in which you make or break your argument. And so if somebody is making claptrap, you're going to discover it when you try to document their sources.
The only thing I've ever heard that was worse was a guy called Richard Raspberry, who was saying, read this paper. And so this guy's reading this paper, and he gets to the words pre-flood and just halts and just stops. It's like, okay, where'd you get this from? And it's and it's like, just keep reading, and he reads a bit, but and Noah comes in. It's like, okay, look, this must be. Did you get this from Abiogenesis? No, says the end of this Raspberry guy, and sort of like they go back and forth through it. Did you write this? And Raspberry kind of pauses for a moment and says, yes. He was citing himself. He's like, here's the paper that proves I'm right. And he wrote and
the very fact that he wouldn't own up to it to the beginning, there already you've got him on a misrepresentation. He didn't say, oh, I have written a paper on that subject. No, he's trying to offer this as an independent confirmation of his position. Oh, that's scurrilous. That's a mad dog.
Well, interestingly, Stout did quote a whole paragraph of himself, but he did say, oh, when I wrote this article for this other person, it's like, well, good for you. Great.
Yeah, you can
we lost a Tony. We lost exactly one Tony.
The bit that's great about Raspberry was he once said that the elephant shrew has more in common with an elephant than it does with other shrews.
Yes. They're both Afrotherians, yeah. Which is very funny. I think actually Dawkins made a little joke about that in the Ancestor's Tale.
Yeah.
But there's one more little bit I want to hit on, just a little bit of chapter 6, and then that can be pretty much it, because I haven't finished going through his whole book. So, but yes, a little bit of chapter 6, which is evolution after chemical evolution. He spends the first part of this chapter describing what he believes a kind to be. Ooh. But he says, and I quote, however, nothing in the Bible requires an initial biblical kind to be the exact equivalent of a taxonomical family, even though it appears this might be the case much of the time. Some of the original kinds might have actually been closer to the taxonomic level of a genus or an order, close quote. Another quote. Oh crap, where is it? I might not have highlighted it. He basically says, the little phrase whose quote, the little phrase whose seed is within itself according to its kind is key to properly understanding what God created. Yet these words provide the key towards building a model which is far superior to the modern evolutionary model for understanding the characteristics of observed variation in plants and animals. Close quote. So, he basically defines kind as everything from a genus to an order.
Well, you know why he's got to do that?
Because it has no meaning.
Well, it's because of the imperative of it. As everybody who's studied the subject of how the word kind was used generically in earlier culture, it was basically a family, and even he is aware of that. But in order to rescue two opposite things, first off, you've got human beings that must be a specially created kind, not negotiable, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. On the opposite spectrum, if you're stuck with families and no bigger, you're going to have a really big problem booking the ark because there's just way too many going around on there. So if you can have it slide around as convenient, depending upon your mood, you can manage to kind of sort of Tony's back, kind of sort of deal with it that way. So there's a logical imperative to that. I definitely have got to have that book eventually because of the stuff on speciation and kinds, because eventually that's going to be one of my books down the road, which is on the depending on the kindness of strangers, to cover how anti-evolutionists deal with the speciation issue. Oh yeah, that's going to be, it's going to be a big one because that's a large topic to tackle.
Jackson
depending on the strangeness of kinds, that's what I think I'm calling it. That's it.
Oh, that's good.
What'd you say?
Jackson, I just posted the link in the side chat. Do you want to stick that in the live chat? This is the video where Gary Phony Beatlemaniacs is talking to Richard Raspberry, and where he cites his own paper. The other thing that's in there is hang out with other people, and a guy called Paul Hartley comes in and is roaring with laughter. And if you ever having a bad day, watch that bit. Just bookmark it to watch it, because you can't help but smile. And Jade comes in later and roars with laughter as well. And you've heard Jade; she has a cackly laugh.
I mean, one of the funniest things I ever heard as soon as I started listening to, and I just don't understand how you guys listen to Neff and True and G-Man. I don't understand how you guys do it. You must be sadomasochists. But it's when I ran into True and heard about Beakgate, I died. I physically, spiritually died. Oh, so he makes a little misspeak, just an accidental. He accidentally says the wrong thing, but he says True Empiricism says he did not believe that a beak, like a bird's beak, is derived from an ATP synthase.
No, I think it's the other way around.
Or okay, fine, the other way around. Either way, you get the point.
Yeah.
Either way, you get the point.
And it was hysterical.
It's like
yes, actually,
right, well,
bird beak is derived from the open front bone of an archosaur, and it's been demonstrated by experiment. But
I mean, it's just it was so loony. But it was just, he just misspoke or whatever. But it was just such a loony thing to say. I couldn't help but laugh.
At times, they don't always understand the terms they bandy about. And if you don't viscerally understand the context of things, it's much easier to do gaffes like that.
Mm-hmm. There's a more amusing version as well with Ronnie. So there's a guy called Arcane, and he says, well, the bird's beak, it goes through, the air. It goes through the body and out the other side, which makes it sound like they fart their way across the sky. And Ronnie just says, "Yeah, I was just about to say that."
Yeah, no, there is a video.
No,
there
please,
is. Yeah,
no.
yes, and there is a video. Cliff, do you remember who did the video of the farting birds flying through the sky? Yeah,
and we wonder why creationists do not contribute more to contemporary systematics.
Yeah, and one of the problems is when you have something like what Arcane said, and when you had what Ronnie said, Ronnie True Empiricism said about it says you don't see something like a bird's beak evolving into something like ATP synthase, which I'm pretty sure the way it is. I have it on my G+. I can find it because I'm the one who did the transcript and posted it.
That's beautiful.
The thing is, I'll find it for you, Jackson, the exact one.
Okay.
I'll also find the farting birds, unless Cliff knows where the farting birds is.
I have a version. I have my own version of it, which I'll do in a moment.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
I've got to turn my volume up a bit for you to hear it.
Okay. Okay.
Arcane's jet-propelled birds, or fart-propelled birds.
So you must have missed that one. Okay.
Hang on.
A bird, it breathes in and it goes all the way through the body and comes out the other side.
That was my own little edit.
Yeah.
He must be misunderstanding the notion that birds have a flow-through ventilation system that stores stuff in alveoli and all that in a way different than
straight through their
mammals do.
digestive tract, evidently.
Yeah, it's like something from a Japanese horror movie. You know, the little rocket-propelled turtle.
Oh God, yeah.
One of the problems is when they make a gaffe like that, rather than just saying, "Oh, I can't believe I said that," like most of us would laugh if we made a mistake like that and somebody brought it up. And I would expect my friends to make full fun of me if I did something like that. They'd go to
double
town.
down.
Oh, they'd have a ball because that's what friends do. We actually play a rather vicious, sometimes a vicious version of Cards Against Humanity, in which we made our own cards about ourselves, and it gets pretty bad. Oh yeah, it gets. But it's also a lot of fun. And the very worst cards, like the very worst cards about me, I made myself, and that's usually the way it goes. But so yeah, you expect that from your friends. These guys have no sense of humor. Rather than say, "Oh, I just misspoke," they double down on this crap. Or they go, "Oh, you atheist," and I'm not even an atheist. Of course, being a Roman Catholic, I'm clearly not a Christian. But but it's you atheists. Are always after us for the least little thing, or you're ignoring the most important part, or whatever. They can't just simply say, "Oh, heck, I misspoke." Isn't that funny?
No, yeah. I mean, I recently put up a video where I made an egregious misstep in some of my information. I had the video pulled down, and I said on Twitter, I was wrong about this. And I said in the video, I was wrong about this. And so I had to re-upload it. That's because that's what
you just leave. How creationists to this day will defend Dwayne Gish.
What'd you say, Tony?
I was just saying, why not just leave it up and have a ball making fun of yourself after like 20 episodes?
Oh yeah. Well, it depends on what the misinformation was. I wouldn't, I think Jackson probably doesn't want to miss.
Oh, there was a goof in one of my lectures that I gave for the thing on the Clifford, where I misidentified him as an American, and instead of correcting the thing, I just left it up. And I was just waiting around to see who would ever notice it. It was like a little nugget of mistake. And finally, somebody caught me on it on Twitter. And I said, "Well, I'm glad you noticed it. Good. You're on the ball. You're actually reading my material. Thank you."
I found the Max Trivium one where he does the farting birds thing.
Oh, you did? Okay, good. Yeah, I was trying to think of who did it.
The air just goes straight through.
Exactly. I was just about to say that.
A bird, it breathes in and it goes all the way through the body and comes out the other side.
That's messed up. Oh my God.
Well,
wait a minute.
Almost on borderline.
See, there's the Ronnie one, which is just amazing because this is bonkers. You just like, what on earth did he just say?
Okay, I'm trying to, but you won't shut your mouth long enough for me to do it. Okay, I'm going to mute you and I'm going to finish what I'm saying. The issue with solipsism is this, and what I just brought to your attention was very clear. You have the issue of solipsism. That's why I asked you if you understood what you were saying. You have your mind independently from my mind. Is that clear enough for you to understand that? I don't know how much easier I can make that for you to understand. Your mind, which is independent, exactly, and your mind, what you're looking at from your standpoint, what you're doing. You are subjectively determining.
If God exists and I go to the fiery lake, this is what I'll have to look at for all of eternity.
Is the same as my mind, independent from mine. Assuming those things that you're looking at are going to be the same as mine. Do you get what I'm saying?
No.
Okay. Well, anyway.
See, there's a simple answer to this. No.
Okay, guys, I put the exact quote. I found it.
Well, thank you.
And it says, this is the exact quote from Ronnie. I think the point being that there is no evidence suggesting that a beak is going to develop into something equivalent to something like an ATP synthase or something, or any small proteins inside of a cell over time if you give it millions of years.
Well, we do agree on something. Thank God.
Yeah,
I know.
And beaks are not going to evolve into doorknobs or Kodachrome film either.
No, that's correct. That's correct.
Oh man.
Oh,
At least we can all gather around the table and shake hands over something.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
we can.
And,
Everybody, Tortukans and otherwise, can all agree that beaks are not going to evolve into ATPs and
Right.
bases.
and
Yeah.
I'll send you the link to my G plus. Well, I've sent you a link to a couple of G plus posts, because not only my G plus post that shows this. Well, actually, you know what? I'll just put it in here because some people might like it. But there's also Ronnie's response to this. But what I wanted to say is I looked up the book you're talking about, and Lynn Margulis is not the one who wrote that book. Some other guy wrote it.
Wait, what?
And
What
I
book?
actually, the one you were talking about earlier, I put it in the side
The
chat.
End
You
of
go up a little
Science?
bit. Yeah, The End of Science.
Really?
It was written. Yeah, there's a Scientific American article
Oh,
here.
Horgan, John Horgan.
Yes, and he said I was wrong about the end of science. What happened is he apparently interviewed a bunch of different scientists, including Margulis. And the one quote that's in this article is from Margulis was, "He's a very nice guy," Margulis said, "and he wrote a very bad book."
Horgan is in my tip work in a lot of ways. He's kind of a doofus. He still has a column at Scientific American every once in a while, but he has really never quite given up on the idea that science is bitten off more than it can chew, that it's in areas that it cannot resolve. And he pops up as an authority quote daisy chain where Gerald Schroeder or Daniel Lapin quote mine Gerald Schroeder, quote mining John Horgan, quote mining Ernst Mayr. And every one of them had misrepresented the sources along the way, and nobody ever bothered to fact check any of it.
That's really funny. Of course. So, well, there's more we could potentially go through, but it's been 2.5 hours. I don't know, RJ. Maybe it could be the subject of an evolution hour in the future. Perhaps.
Yeah, we could pick it up as an additional one. The one I have planned for Tuesday is going to be, or Wednesday. Is going to also bring up some stuff that just dropped on my plate from Cornelius Hunter. If you're aware of who he is, he's with the Discovery Institute, and he's one of their prime idiots. And he decided to go after a couple technical science papers in there, and they're all open access. And so I'm going to be alluding to those, in addition to continuing the saga of the Rupi and Sanford book on Homo erectus.
Yeah, we got a little bit of Sanford in here, some genetic entropy, just a little bit. He just kind of brings it up and is like, "Hey, check this out."
He is often quote mined or cited by a young Earth creationist, not so much from intelligent designers because he's often a young Earth creationist camp, but it happens occasionally. But I was just overwhelmed at how superficial his book was when I finally got a look at it. I mean, there are creationists who do detailed argument. Sanford wasn't one of them in that book. It was really thin.
I guess I just also want to say he also quote mined a book by Dawkins that I've read, and so which is really funny.
Run in and look it up. Yeah. Well, Dawkins is the one they naturally go after.
Which is funny because he, hasn't. He's just a popular figure anymore, and really not even especially that popular anymore. He's not doing too well health wise, so he's kind of off the scene mostly.
Well, there are a lot of people who were very influenced by his stuff, Julius Sweeney and others. But I literally never had read any of Dawkins's work at the time. I only started looking into his stuff because he was always the lightning rod that the creationists were going after. So I go, okay, I'm going to have to read this Dawkins guy because I'm too busy reading the technical papers.
Right. I mean, I do enjoy his work, although I haven't read the last book of his that I read was The Greatest Show on Earth, which is now one of my favorite books. It's a really good book about the evidence for evolution. What'd you say, Tony?
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, that's the last thing I read by him, too. And I also enjoy that book quite a bit.
Yeah,
he's a good popularizer. He connects up together. His one limitation is that he's not a paleontologist. He's a zoologist. And so he doesn't have a visceral sense of things. For a gobsmacker, I think Neil Shubin's Inner Fish is way shorter and much more interesting.
Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed that one also. But yeah, I guess I guess kind of in conclusion for this video, not conclusion forever, I hope, that this creationist Stout, Timothy Stout, he's a weird guy. I mean, source methods wise, he is cribbing some very interesting little bits of information, right? He's kind of staying more towards answers in Genesis, which is fairly unusual, not quoting any Morris or Gish or Hovind.
Because they're not available online.
Okay.
See, he's relying on stuff. Henry Morris's stuff, very little of it would be available for him. So if he's a secondary quote scavenger that's running off of online material, there's only a limited repertoire for him to play with.
Yeah. It is interesting the sources he decided to choose for this book, or this little booklet. Very interesting. Which, I hope I can press him about some of these things and then interview. I still have to email him.
Is there any chance
on hand during that?
We had 2 comments from the panel at the same time.
I was just going to ask if there's any chance you could show that that paper again, or at least go over the title of that pamphlet.
Yeah,
I got you covered. That's right. Here.
How God reveals himself. Whoops, move it over slightly. You're the same way as I do. It's hard to remember what's part of the screen where I'm at.
How God reveals himself through science. Chemical evolution cannot create life.
God. That has nothing to do with God.
Oh, no.
I know.
Well, he equates, you're an atheist in his definition. Basically, if you don't believe in creationism, you're not a Christian, basically. So,
they're very fussy about that.
His whole shtick is like you take, like RJ said earlier, you take all of it or you take none of it, which, whatever.
You guys are in luck. I actually found this. I found a link to it, so I'm going to go ahead and post it.
Oh, cool. It's available open access. Yay! I want it.
I'll link it in the description also, because I would love for people to be able to see that. Look at it. Oh yeah, that's right. I do think it is online. That's right. Creation Truth Outreach. Yes. Okay,
this is wonderful. We could have studied.
Well, there you go. RJ, now you have it.
Right.
Well, now you guys have it. And you can
I'm trying to infect everybody with the source methods approach because it's the game that idiots cannot play.
So anyways, guys, I'll leave you with that light reading. And on that note, I'm going to end the stream. Thank you, my panel, for being here. And thank you, audience, for listening to us. Thank you to other panel members who have now left us and gone other places. I had a good time.
Apologize for the stupid.
Bye-bye, everybody.
All right. Bye, everybody.